You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
I met Carrie at a wonderful meeting in D.C., and I had never met Carrie before, although I've seen some of her work. And listening to her speak, I said to myself, this is a really super intelligent woman who thinks much deeper than most people and really looks at the big picture and how the little things that miss most people's radar impact the big picture. And with that, Carrie, welcome to the Final Say.
Thank you. I'm petrified to say anything. I'm looking over my shoulder to see who's behind me that you're talking about. So now, John, if it was a closed-door meeting, neither of us was there, right?
Neither of us was there.
There we go.
Well, I think it's safe to say I was in a meeting behind a closed door but we didn't say where, with whom, or even the subject matter. But it was very important to me that in a meeting that was really discussing some very, very critical international policy issues, I just have to say, and I don't need to scratch your back too much longer, but I was extremely impressed with the way you thought. We went out, we had a terrific lunch together, and I just felt I had to have you on the show, and I imagine you're probably going to end up on the show, many more times in the future, because there are things that you dug into, some points you made. So I'm just looking at the clock here. Let's assume we have a short 6-7 minutes here. So we'll dive deeper on another call, but give people a high level. How did you come to this focus on protecting copyright integrity, and what are the high-level issues that really affect the average person? And I'm particularly concerned about the fact that we live in an outgassing, social media-driven society where we're all now creators of intellectual property. So what drives you, and what do our people need to focus on?
How I came to this initiative is through multiple directions, believe it or not, but that's been my life. I was an illustrator for 20 years, and I know the value of a single image in terms of becoming a commercial piece. Same way that Jim Davis drew Garfield or Charles Schulz drew Snoopy, I drew bunnies and mice and bears, and each time my artwork, which I called employees, went out to work for me, I got paid. So I was a small business entrepreneur and an independent woman. Long before that was a Sheryl Sandberg for Facebook lean-in term. I retired from that career, and I retrained as a crime analyst and profiler. And I tell people the same model, just a different business. Designer, you're looking for things, remembering, putting pieces together. It's the same thing I did as a CCIA and profiler. And then I ended up in D.C. after a period of time, and I ended up reinventing myself as a news photographer and covering the White House and Capitol Hill. So I was gaining over time a familiarity with the cast of characters that most people just watch on the news. I sort of hung around the Pelosi's, the Boehners, the Cantors, and when I had been sick for a period of time and stepped forward to license my photographs, I found that I couldn't. They were everywhere, all over the Internet. Now, involved in this, too, was a personal tragedy, a brother murdered by terrorists. And I was helpless watching his name being abused, along with many other victims of terrorism, military, others, a young girl in Canada whose picture was found on a dating website. And I had the wherewithal to remember years back a couple of things that I could string it all together. In Congress, I knew that for them to open their ears up, you have to present a story that they can tell to their constituents. Because the truth about, you were talking about pork earlier as I was listening, the truth about Congress is the day they get into office, they're running for the next seat 2 years down the road. And I came back to Congress with what I call hopefully might become a 2-dimensional arts, which is writing, photography, dancing, performance, movie, along those lines, IP, which is intellectual property, and ID, which is identity, and commerce, which is clearly the monies that someone coming from a an arts background like me is looking to make an income. We can't do that anymore. Most recently, what's made the conversation so much easier for me is when Congress, same time that you and I found out about, and you and I meaning the general public, your audience, found out about Facebook's intention to take everything we've posted onto their pages, and that they've kept, even if we've deleted it, and they're going to create the world's largest agency for intellectual property, photography. They're going to sell our stuff for advertising. And a year earlier, we heard about Google, that, as I teased some of the congressmen, that every saucy text they sent a young intern has been archived. So there's a different set of ears listening now, and that's where this initiative came from, which is focused on arts, IP, and enforcement. Long answer to a short question. But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to just say, because I haven't had, John, as I tell people, I've never had a job, but I work 24/7. And some people don't grasp that. We hear all this talk about the economy is about jobs, jobs, jobs. Oh, my goodness, no. It's about the intellectual property that we're losing, that we don't own anymore. That's what it's about. And coming at it from this way is where I'm saying the conversation just sort of got pulled away. So when I've sat with military and they've talked about toxins, well, I've actually sat with military or been pulled into conversations unexpectedly when I worked in Europe where I had a different perspective, and I am constantly stunned at how, I want to use the word illiterate because it's the gut word that pops up, but how poorly read many of the people we count on are. And so when I speak up, it's not the common thought, and people tend to get quiet, and then the conversation picks up and they go on as if I never said anything. But a lot of times they come back and say, you gave us something new to think about.
Well, I'll give people something to think about. I open this up by saying, it's about every one of us is a contributing person to intellectual property. If you go to the end game and you look at the words of the Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, and you listen to their own words, they're actually literally interested and passionate about their end game, which is to have intelligent chips planted in people's heads to improve our thoughts. And while you can make functional biological excuses for why these things could be very good, certainly you could do so for people who were injured in the line of duty, the net result is, what is the end game here? And we're not actually that far to, I'll ask you one of the toughest questions you could even ask, who owns our thoughts? And there's two ways you can look at this, and both will point to Google. One is, let's say, Google Glass. Who owns what I look at? I mean, if I follow the same intellectual property, the same usage rights agreements that you have in social media now, am I not giving them, ownership of, or at least the collective ownership to use what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at? I mean, it's really, really scary to think about, because algorithms are the angel of the devil, depending on what they're trying to accomplish.
Oh, it's the devil. There's no question about it. And I've spent time around Eric on and off for about 9-10 years, and I'm still asking people, how did he get military technology to build Google Glass? And I was at the USPTO last week, the Patent and Trademark Office, asking similar questions that the answers are really quite simple. We think those are decision makers in these government offices. Their on-video answer was, we just do what Congress tells us to do. So who owns our thoughts? Gosh almighty, it started out, I describe what Google and the search engines and the ISPs do as we've been groomed. End of story. I call what they're doing actively as human trafficking, and my term has been picked up by someone over in the EU in addressing intellectual property. The contracts, it's as good as the paper that they're written on, and they're not written on paper. So unless you printed out every contract of the entry company that you deal with and every contract of all the different affiliates and partners they have on board, we don't know what we've agreed to, and they change rapidly. Now, they all tell us that we have to go on and check the TOS or TOS is the cute name they give us. who has the time? So pulling things back, and this is what I've been doing is, I love to peel back the layers on the onion. And it's as sort of a variation when you said it's either going to be an onion or a rose when I finish with it. The things that the search engines set up the legislators to fall prey to, as they've done us, is the definitions of fair use and safe harbor. Safe harbor means if I give you a gun and then you go take that gun and shoot someone, well, I'm not responsible because I didn't pull the trigger. Now, in litigation, we know that's a different approach. It's called tie the tails of the tiger together and let everybody fight it out. But that's not the way that people are interpreting safe harbor, because a lot of people like Google and AOL and Yahoo. They fund different campaigns. They host events. The other thing that's abused domestically and internationally with the search engines is what's called fair use. There are, I think 126 signatories to the Berne Convention. Not that that makes a difference in fair use, but it sort of does because they all agree to the same thing. There's 4 definitions of fair use. I don't need to remember 1. I don't need to remember 2. I do need to remember 3 and 4. And I keep on telling the Copyright Office, reverse the order. Number 4, which is the one nobody ever gets down the page to read about, says if I put my picture that I took, that I make a living from on the Internet, and you use it, and I can't make a living from it anymore, then you are in violation of fair use. It's not fair use. And if you take something of mine and you use it exactly like it is, then that's not fair use. So we all think that the legislators are bright, and it's okay. I'm going to, continue to peel the layers back on the onion because I think that's what's been making the difference in where I've been moving what I call the copyright ball forward with Congress, is I've been stepping over the GCs, the General Councils, that feed data to the legislators who don't have time to read everything that every constituent wants read and listened to. And I then have, so I've been sort of explaining things in my inimitable own way to legislators, and they're getting it. It never occurred to the legislators that if I'm an independent, businesswoman, or was until I got hurt, that if I'm not working, I don't have a paycheck. Well, first of all, if I'm freelance, I don't have a paycheck ever. It's I earn, and then I move forward, and I earn again. I don't have pension and insurance and disability and all those other things that these jobs, the JOBS people have. And when I got hurt, there's no disability, no SSI. Fortunately, I had my royalties from my IP, and that's why I've been fighting to make sure legislators are getting it, and they are. And it's so hard for someone to get the attention of a legislator, but I've been able to, and this is what I explained to them, is that, going back to the scary part, John, we really need another time to talk about it. It's scarier than you would ever think.
Well, we do, and I absolutely want to have you back because we're cutting into the second segment, and I'm gonna have to let you go in a second here. I do want to point out there's a very interesting side effect here, which is think about all that we hear, the heavy political overtones and insults about the 1%ers and so forth, and how evil they are, and then what you want to talk about is not the 1%ers. The 1% of the 1% of the 1%ers who are aggregating enough intellectual property to basically become Skynet. And I'm not a conspiratorial type of guy, but I want you to think about the power of having a couple of CEOs who heavily support and sponsor government folks who have that much capability to aggregate that much information about all of us, and now think about healthcare and all those things. So I'm gonna need to say goodbye and let you go here because I don't want to be rude to our other guests who I've already held over. I apologize for the number glitches coming in, but Carrie, I so thank you for coming on. I'm glad we had at least a chance to teaser, and I think this is a great segment for us to jump back into sometime in the next couple of weeks, and we'll throw in some anecdotes and humanize it a bit. If you could, really quick, Carrie, please tell us where they could find out about the organization that you're just getting off the ground and how they can help.
www.centerforcopyrightintegrity.com, and it's a soft launch this week. It's going to be a harder official launch next week, and I'm hoping to also integrate a crowdfunding campaign. I've been doing this all on my own, which is always the way I worked as a freelancer, but I'm speaking for many other people's voices, and I'm hoping that they'll support what I'm doing.
Well, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, please do so. Carrie, we'll touch base and have you on again soon. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, John.